To you from my autobiography entitled, I Count My Life by SABBATHS. I consider it to be America's premier toilet reading book. Part 2, My Childhood, Chapter 22, Church Members. It is my view that any startup church can attract strange people as well as good people. I've already discussed James and Virginia Guffey, and by the way, Virginia was a Heston, and Bill Cruz, but there were many others who left an indelible impact on me. Charles and Miranda Cunningham come to mind. Our home movies show them coming out of the little white barn church smiling, waving, and Miranda's baby blue maternity top ruffling in the breeze. They are now divorced, and I think Miranda may even be dead. Chuck, as he has always been known, was always an enterprising guy. I have no clue at all of the things he's been involved in through the years, but I know he's built a reputation for the unusual and the bizarre. He came from a very large family of about 12 children. A younger brother, Roy, was best man at my wedding, but my earliest memories are of Chuck and Miranda walking out of the little barn church, Miranda pregnant as could be. They became very good friends with James and Virginia Guffey. Alan Centers was a quiet, solid man of good humor. He was a serious Christian and wasn't the type to draw attention to himself. His wife, Sadie, came to church with him, but she was never fully committed. I think she was a cigarette smoker, and that was a habit that kept her from involvement. Dad preached strongly against tobacco use since cigarettes are a strong addictive habit. She had short, curly blonde hair and was really skinny. They moved away for quite a while, and then she died. After that, Alan came back to this area and looked me up. I'd been pastoring for 3 or 4 years, and it was a huge compliment to me that he still remembered me and was interested. I really think it was his love for my dad that drew him to me. The Tibbies, James and Ella, they called her Eller, were a solid couple in the early days until my father's preaching against tobacco and smoking drove them away. They had a son, Niolas, who was the town drunk. You could see him staggering across town intoxicated and wobbling all over. Their daughter married Mr. Young and raised a very nice family. Carlin and Bernice came to Sunday school, but they were much older than me. I still keep in touch with the family, and I'm still Little Stevie. It's a warm feeling to hear Mrs. Young talk. She still lives alone in her 90s, a half a block from our present church. Eller Tibby told my father in no uncertain terms she didn't believe tobacco was a sin. She and her husband were going to continue to dip snuff, and besides being transplanted Kentuckians, they knew tobacco was a cash crop that usually kept body and soul together in the South. Before the Tibbies eventually left, Brother Tibby would occasionally preach. For me, it was loads of fun because Brother Tibby had false teeth. He would get all fired up, turn red in the face, and begin to shout. Suddenly, his teeth would come flying out of his mouth. They never made it to the floor because he would throw out his arm and catch them in the crook of his elbow and hastily pop them back in. This didn't slow him down. He would lose them 2 or 3 times while he was preaching. James Guffey had 3 brothers, Johnny, George, and Colonel. There were 3 sisters also, Martha, Nettie, and Lula. Johnny Guffey was never a member of our church, but his brother George was. Colonel came occasionally on holidays. George's wife's name was Josephine. She came, but she didn't like my father, so eventually George dropped out too. One of the sisters came to church with her baby, which she was nursing, and sat pretty close to the front. While my father was preaching, she opened up her blouse, brought out her large engorged breast, and began nursing the child without any covering. I will never forget how horrified my mother was and how my father lost his focus on his message. Chapter 23. Preachers. When I think of those early days, to me it seemed as if I were living in a wild, wild west religion. Many of the preachers were not educated, and many couldn't even read. Most of the wives could read, so they'd have the wife read a few words of their text and then preach a bit. Then they'd shout, "Read!" And she'd read a bit more, and they'd preach a bit more. There were some preachers, even yet today, who have adopted that style, and even though they're educated, it can be quite effective. One of the preachers who came up from Kentucky was Albert Skaggs. He was a balding, shrimpy little man who had a sideline to help support him and his family. They produced ceramics, Kleenex boxes, fish, knickknacks. They would pull up in front of the little white barn church in a utility-type vehicle, open the double back door, sell their wares. Sister Skaggs bore a passel of kids and always had this sad, sad smile on her face. I don't recall much about Brother Skaggs' preaching, but he was a man of good humor. He wore a fedora to cover up his bald head, and when he would get to laughing, he'd whip it off and slap his knee with it. Another preacher who came was old Brother Jackson. He was also from Kentucky, and he was one who couldn't read. His wife would do the reading while he'd do the preaching. At some point during the revival, he got wind that my dad was preaching against tobacco. As most people in the South knew, tobacco was a cash crop regulated by the state. The amount of land that you owned dictated the growing of tobacco. One's plot to grow was governed according to the size. That was to keep the price high. Well, one night Brother Jackson was preaching away, and he suddenly got on the subject of tobacco. And he proclaimed loudly and firmly as he could, "Chewing Wrigley Spearmint gum is 10 times worse than chewing tobacco because the gum will rot your teeth." My dad was filled with consternation because this contradicted what he'd been preaching. Tune in for the next episode.